35 years ago, in December 1980, NATO's largest air base was the joint American and UK RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in Suffolk County, England. After midnight on December 26 and 28, 1980, then U.S. Air Force Airman First Class John Burroughs was the only military person known to have encountered unidentified aerial phenomena up close on both of those nights in Rendlesham Forest along the base. The UAP phenomena was also reported in Rendlesham Forest on the night of December 27th, but John Burroughs was not there that night. What is especially strange about the night of December 28th is that even though John's sea flight was not on duty, John felt drawn back to the site where he and Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston had encountered lights after midnight on December 26th. John got a friend to drive him back to the forest, where he was surprised to see Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt leading several men with light-alls, Geiger counters, cameras, trucks, and other equipment into the field near the forest area where he and Jim Peniston had been 2 nights before. John was puzzled when Colonel Halt did not seem surprised to see him there, and even said that he thought John can bring the aerial phenomena closer to them if he walks out toward the field where orange, white, and blue lights are moving around each other. These events were once recalled in detail by John Burroughs in 1988, 8 years after the Rendlesham Forest events, in Hypnosis, organized by Hollywood TV producer Kurt Brubaker for a TV special entitled UFO Cover-Up Live. Even though none of that 1988 hypnosis session, conducted by hypnotherapist Al Ward, ended up in the TV production, Brubaker wanted to find out the truth about long-time rumors that John Burroughs had either jumped up on a craft in Rendlesham Forest or was lifted into a beam of light. John Burroughs himself was confused by that rumor because he could not consciously remember what happened to him near the strange lights on either the early morning of December 26th or December 28th. Here now is a brief excerpt from that November 11th, 1988 hypnosis session, in which Burroughs, in his hypnotic state, talks very rapidly, quoting Colonel Halt as the deputy base commander talks about the strange lights that have been, quote, talking to their minds, close quote, and directs Airman First Class John Burroughs to go further toward the lights along with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, who Colonel Halt seems to have signaled separately from his group of men to go with John.
Colonel Halt and I were standing there. It's back again, I can't believe it. He acted like he wasn't surprised. The craft was still hovering out there. He goes, they're coming from that craft. They've been out there for hours. And I go, well, I want to get closer. And he says, okay. And he goes, John, I want you to go out there because I think you can bring this closer. Well, what do you mean? Who told you that? Colonel Hall. I think you can bring this ship and these things closer. They want you to do it. Who wants you to do it? Colonel Hall said they did. I didn't understand what was going on. He goes, this is the most bizarre, weirdest experience. People will never believe it.
Do you know why they thought you could bring it closer?
No, I didn't understand. And that was something that I never understood either. They wanted me there, and they wanted me there in stages. Like, you could stay in this area for a while. They weren't surprised that I was there either. They were not surprised. The people that saw me come out there were surprised, but Colonel Halt was not surprised.
What happened then?
Well, then he put his arm around me, and he said, let's go. And then all of a sudden there was this short buck sergeant, and he was there, like coming towards me, like he wasn't with the main group. And he says, let's go. And 3 of us walked towards the craft. And Colonel Halt goes, I've got all this on tape recording. And he shows me the tape recorder. And he has a radio with him too, his radio. And he goes, and I'm recording all this through the wing command post. And he goes, let's go. So we started walking. And the light was there, and it was in the distance. And then, there it was. 3 blue lights. Oh, yeah, there they are. And he goes, that's what we had before. And he goes, John, he goes, you're never going to believe this, but a group of us, they made contact with us. They were on top of us. It was like they spoke to us. I go, they? What's they? And he goes, these lights. I go, you mean you saw something? He goes, these lights. He goes, there were lights there, and they were speaking to us. They were over us. They were flying in the sky. They were hovering over us. They were doing all kinds of things.
Now, John, hold it right there where you can see those blue lights. Now, I want you to look at one of those lights. That light will talk back to you. Tell me what it says.
Come to me. They started moving, and we all froze. And they were up and down.
You mean the lights?
Yeah, they split up.
That's that light, what it's representing.
The craft.
Now, is there any life form in or with that craft?
That was the life form.
Back in 2010, John Burroughs and I met and talked with former Sergeant Adrian Bustinza about what he remembered that night of December 28, 1980, walking next to John Burroughs toward the strange aerial lights. He told us he saw a red, orange, and white light coming toward John. Quote, the lights pushed me to the ground, and I saw the red-orange light on top of you, close quote. After this short break, Adrian Bustinza, who has long worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and now concentrates on juvenile rehabilitation, is going to join us for the first time on radio to talk about his own memories of what happened in Rendlesham Forest that December 28th and the night before on December 27th.
Radio right here on kgraradio.com, and tonight we're already in episode 5 of the program with our very special guest tonight for the first time ever on a live radio interview, Adrian Bustinza. And with that, I give you John Burroughs.
Thank you, Race. And Adrian, it's hard to believe it's been 35 years. I'm so glad you're willing to come on tonight so people can hear what you have to say. And what I want to do is just start from the beginning as far as that night and let you go ahead and start talking about what happened coming on and everything else. Does that sound good?
Sounds good enough.
All right. Go ahead when you're ready.
Well, as Linda had mentioned on the times and the dates, we came on to shift, and we each got our assignments after we broke on guard mount, and I was told that I was going to be the NCO IC over at Woodbridge. And Woodbridge Bentwaters, as Linda mentioned before, is geographically 2 bases that were geographically separated, but we were to man both bases and for the protection of the United States Air Force in Europe there. And, we had our normal guard mount, and the guys all got assigned to their posts, and I got assigned to mine, Alpha 1. I proceeded in the CJ7, and I drove over to Woodbridge, which we normally did, and we would relieve each other. That night, I recall, there wasn't a security specialist on duty over the base. It was actually a law enforcement. And at this point in time, I don't recall exactly who it was, but I remember it was 2 people, or 2, a sergeant and tech sergeant. They were in a vehicle, in the law enforcement vehicle, and we exchanged basically, what was going on with the base. We debriefed each other, and they went about their business, and I started my rounds of the facility where everybody was posted, one of those being at the East Gate. And things went as normal for a few hours. Got called over the radio, stated that I need to report to the East Gate due to and touch base with the airmen down there because of some issues that were going on. And if I remember correctly, it was stated over the radio. It said the airman is reported of seeing some activity, some lights of some sort at the east gate. So I proceeded down there, and I want to say it was, and I'm not very sure on this, but I'm almost sure on it that it was Airman Markham, I believe was his name. And he was at the east gate, and we talked. He told me what was going on. He's seen some lights outside the base. And I told him, I said, they're not on the base. I said, so we have to, just maintain our post and, report anything else. And I remember him telling me he didn't want to stay out there because it was something different than what we ever had dealt with before. At that point, I made contact with Central Control, which was our point of contact, and that was located at Bentwaters. And then I remember the Whiskey Tower, which was the weapons storage area, WSA, coming on the radio as well, stating that they had seen some lights. But it was just, at that point, there was just, everybody started talking on the radio, and I had to tell everybody to calm down and that we would communicate by landline if we had to. Right after that, I was summoned back to Bentwaters. I drove back to Bentwaters base, and I can't remember exactly. I know I went to the security specialist post, the main control, and I told them that, some of the airmen were startled over there, and, some things were going on. We weren't sure. And I believe that night it was Master Sergeant Washington that was on duty, and Lieutenant, I want to say it was Lieutenant England that was on duty, but I think he had just gotten off of duty, and we came on. I don't quite remember who was on duty as far as that was concerned, but I do remember when I returned back to Woodbridge base that we ended up going to pick up Lieutenant England and Sergeant Ball, and we proceeded out the East Gate into the forest area. And if you remember, East Gate was, you went out the gate, you went out a road, and then we turned to the right and went out there into where everything was apparently taking place, which I did not know at the time that there was already some people out there. And we took several, Lieutenant England, Sergeant Ball, they commandeered the Jeep, I remember, the CJ7 I was riding, and they gave me one of the crew cab Ford blue trucks and told me to go pick up some light-alls over in the Woodbridge base. So we went back, and I don't exactly recall who was with me. I can see their faces, but I can't recall their names. We made sure that the light-alls were full of gas, and the vehicles were full of gas, and we had approximately 2 or 3 light-all units with us. We took them back, and that's when strange things started to happen, because I remember we pulled them up, we situated them in certain areas that we were instructed to situate them on, and and then at that point, they kind of like started up, but then died out, like they had choked out or something. So we continued to try to, get them started, and they wouldn't start. And it was very, at the time, and I don't mean in retrospect being funny, but it was funny that something like that would happen. So the next thing I know, they ordered us back to go pick up some more light-alls and to make sure that they were gassed up, and we checked them for gas, and they were gassed up. They got one light-all going, and then it shut down again. And before it shut down, though, it would, like, sputter, and the lights would flicker, and so then it turned off completely. And for those who are not familiar with a light-all unit, you can position it at any height up to, I believe, depending the ones we had, I think you could position. They had the jack where it's triangular, where they can be lifted up high, and it basically puts a spotlight on certain areas. But we weren't able to get them started, so we didn't use them. But we were summoned to go out into the forest area and try to locate the lights that were moving about in the forest. And there were several of us out there. Some of the shift members that had gotten off in the prior shift were summoned out there as well. We were all deployed out there. We walked around, we checked, and this is when we encountered several animals out in the forest that at one point were being very loud, and another point became very quiet and still. It's like there was no more animals out there. I found that very strange. Several of us did. Then the lights started appearing, and it was like they were maneuvering between trees, and the lights were blue, red, orange, and kind of like a bluish tint, whitish bluish tint. And, at one point, somebody even mentioned, well, it could be the lighthouse. But that was dismissed, because if you're standing facing the lighthouse and the lights come around behind you, that's not the lighthouse coming around behind you. The lighthouse doesn't move. So I knew that wasn't the fact at that time. And then when you're looking up into the sky and the lights are shining down on you, or through the forest, through the trees from on top, and you're not hearing any noises such as a helicopter or plane or, hovercraft, anything like that. There wasn't any noise. It was just us talking on the radio, and, talking to the airmen, to each other, and so forth. So there was no way that it could have been the lighthouse at that point. So we continued on doing and looking through the forest and chasing. Basically, we were chasing lights. And the commotion started. People started getting excited. At some points, people were running. At other points, I recall a couple of airmen that actually cried and said that they were scared, and they were going back to the point and calmed a couple of them down. They returned them back to the checkpoint. And at one point, and I'm trying to put it all together, still remember, because I had just tried to forget this whole ordeal for many years. And what happened was, I ended up back at Bentwaters, and I remember that's when I ran into John, or I saw John out there, and I was wondering, what John was doing in the security area. Normally, law enforcement had their own building. We had our own. And then I ended up back at the point where everybody was, at the checkpoint, and that's where I ran into John again and Colonel Howe. And Colonel Howe was holding a tape recorder, a small tape recorder. Back then, they were about, I'd say, the size of a phone, of a iPhone 4 or 5 now, the smaller ones, the regular ones, and it has a little flap that opens up, and he was speaking into it. Of course, because of his rank and my status, also my rank, I didn't question anything, but I figured he was doing memos as far as what was going on, the deployment, and so forth. At one point, Larry Warren was out there, and we were instructed, because I don't know if Larry told Colonel Holt that some people had cameras and recorders out there or something, or if I told him when we saw them when we were driving up. But I do remember seeing when we were driving up all kinds of police officers, and we called them bobbies. Then Colonel Hall instructed us to go confiscate. And we went, and I remember confiscating several cameras, and we took them back and gave it to them. And as I had a conversation with John, and I was telling John, the type of cameras there was, and if I remember specifically, one of them was like a Minolta camera, but it was I think more like, isn't it? I think it's a Monica or something to that effect. I remember because it had the big letters in the front of the camera, and we turned those in. I lost track of Larry at that point. Everybody was moving about everywhere. I was by Colonel Hall. I remember talking to Lieutenant England momentarily and Sergeant Ball. At that point, I remember John was talking to Colonel Hull, and John was pressing the issue about going back out to the forest, and he told John that he could go, and he told me to go with him. At that point, we go out into the forest, and we weren't very far from each other. I'd say a couple of arms length. We were walking, and at one point, that's when John got in front of me, and he was like in between some trees. There was a little clearing, but there was in between some trees, and a light from above just shined on him. I mean, it's just like somebody just turned a switch on. And I remember I looked at him, and I don't know, I couldn't remember if I was trying to say something to him but I remember I said, something, and then I felt like I got pushed down. I got pushed from behind, and that's when, I tried to break my fall, and my left hand went into the lighted area and stuff, and it startled me, so I jumped back up and got back up, and at the same time, I felt like I was being pulled back up by my pack. I looked at John, and John was trying to look up to the light, and he was looking. I remember him looking at himself, at his arms and his hands, and the light was. It was like fuzzy, like when you get a snowy TV, but it was like it looked like particles in the light, like you do when you get into a dusty road and you see the particles in the light. And it was, I couldn't tell you exactly how long, maybe 5-10 minutes, maybe longer, I don't know. I was more startled than everything else, and I'm sure John was too at the point. And my reaction was to call out to him, and, it was in my mind, it crossed my mind to run, but where do you run? You know what I was running from. And then the light went out, and I remember the light being, very bright. I even felt it kind of warmish, kind of like if it was warm, like a spotlight. And then we returned back, and that's when I have issues remembering some of the things that happened thereafter. Where we went, who we talked to, but I remember ending up back in the base, back in the barracks. Remember running into Larry in the stairs, talking to Larry, and Larry seemed a little bit upset about what had happened, and he was more startled than upset, but then they were already, I think, questioning him at the time, and then I started getting questioned, and, that's when everything started evolving, where we got pulled. I was told that some people were there to see me, to come downstairs, because we were up like in the second, third floor. I went to the OSI office. I wrote a statement, about 2.5 pages, maybe 3 pages long. I tried to get a copy of it. They wouldn't give me a copy. They said they would give me one. I never received a copy of it. I remember going and getting debriefed by Major Ziegler, and he just told me basically, you know, just cooperate, do what they tell you to do, and so forth. He wasn't really involved with the situation. He wasn't out there. And this was already, you know, the next morning. And through the years, I've tried to recall certain spaces of things that were empty, what happened in between. How did I get back to the barracks? I don't recall how I got back to the barracks. I'm sure I got a ride with somebody or drove something, but I don't recall how. I remember seeing when I was through placing my store, putting my statement in and giving it to the OSI officers. I was coming out the building. I recall running into John. You know, kind of just, I believe I just kind of looked at John. I don't even remember if I said anything or not. And I remember shaking my head, and, you know, they told me not to speak to anybody, not to, you know, say anything to anyone because there was a current investigation going on, which I understood. So I tried not to speak to anyone. But, you know, I wanted to call home. I remember I called home. I guess I broke silence by doing that because I kind of told my parents or my mom basically what had gone on, what had happened. And that's when my mom told me, she says, well, that's kind of funny. She says, because we've had some vehicles, some black vehicles out here with men sitting in them, and they've been in front of the house. They've been at the end of the street where my parents lived at the time. And she says, what's going on? And I was trying to explain it to her, and I said, but they told us not to talk about it and anything. She said, I remember my mom said, well, don't say anything. Remember, your dad works for the government, so you know, do what you're being told to do. And I remember telling my mom, I said, okay. And we hung up, and I want to say it was later that evening or that afternoon, somebody came to my room. I don't recall who it was. I want to say it might have been Skinner, who was my roommate at the time, or Trimatosi, who was another roommate of mine. And they told me that somebody wanted to talk to me downstairs. I went to the end of the barracks where we were at, and I looked from the end of the steps, and there was some gentlemen that were down there, and it was a Air Force car. It was a government car, that is. And I said, I'll be down in a minute. And I went down, and they asked me to get in the car. And I said, well, where we're going? And they said, we need to get in the car. Got some more questions. So I got in the car with him. And we drove to Woodbridge. We didn't go to the OSI office. We went to Woodbridge base. And there was when you go into Woodbridge, when you do go to Woodbridge, you would have to kind of go, it's out one gate, and then you end up going through the east gate or through the front base, and we went through the back. They kind of asked questions as far as, you know, like, where were you at when you first got reported to, and so forth. And we went through the scenario, and I explained that to them. I pointed in a direction outside the east gate. I told them where the security specialist was. I told them where I had been driving around and where I saw the lights when I was driving, what direction I came from, and so forth. And we got back in the vehicle. We went back to Bentwaters, and instead of going back to the barracks, which I thought where I was going, we ended up going to the area, like we're driving towards the security base itself, where we had our guard mounts and stuff. We passed through maintenance and so forth, and I saw the camera. There was this big old sign, and there was this building, and it had where they developed photographs and so forth. And I always called it the camera shop. And we stopped. They pulled over. they got out, they opened my door, and they said, come on in. So I walked in. At that point, I thought maybe they were going to show me some pictures or something because I said, that's the area that we were in. But that wasn't the case. When we went in, it was, and it was like down a hallway. And we kept walking down that hallway. And there was we went right, and there was like, I think a door or another hall. And then we went into a room. And at first, you know, they said, have a seat. And I was like, well, what's going on? Because the room was kind of like empty with just a table and a chair. And I was like, well, what's going on? They said, well, we're going to ask you some questions. And I really didn't want to sit down. I started getting scared at that point. And I said, well, I don't want to sit down. I said, I don't want to do this. I said, I want to go back to the barracks. And they said, it was, you know, you need to sit down. We're going to ask you questions, and you need to cooperate. And one of the guys put his hand on my shoulder, didn't force me down, but was like, you're going to sit down. So I sat down, and I started looking around, and they turned the lights off. And that really spooked me at that point. And then that's when the light came out in front of me. And I don't recall seeing a light in front of me at that point. But a light came out in front of me, and there was a gentleman. I could see the silhouette, and he started asking me questions. And he was asking me questions as to, you know, what did you see out there? And I started asking him, well, who are you? And he said, you need to answer the questions. He never identified himself to me. He said I needed to be more concerned as to what I saw out there and to tell him what I saw, because he was going to record everything. And when he said record, I said, a tape recorder or what? He says, I'm recording everything. And I started to tell him about the lights, the response, what I saw. And when I was telling him that, there were several times during the interrogation that the gentleman told me, he said, no, you didn't see that. You saw it was the lighthouse. It was the light shines and it reflects off the trees. And I said, light doesn't reflect off a tree. I said, light shines on the tree and you can see the tree. And I said, and when the light comes around behind you or above you, that's not a lighthouse. And he was very persistent about it being the light from the lighthouse. And then I told him, I said, well, the light from the lighthouse is either going to be, it's going to be white and it's going to rotate. But I said, you know, supposedly that lighthouse is too far away. I said, but then again, and he says, you're not hearing me. He says, I'm telling you that you're seeing this light from the lighthouse. And he said that he didn't have time for games, that I needed to be truthful and tell him what I really saw, and which was the light. And I said, I was truthful with you. I said, I saw the light. I said, but the light was green, it was blue, it was orange. I said, yes, it was a white with a blue tint. And then I told him at that point, I said, there was one point where the light, one of the lights, broke out into about 5 different smaller lights. I said it was a big ball, and it just burst like a fireworks do. And I said, and it broke out, and they just kind of all maneuvered, and then it kind of left. And there was silence, and he told me, he said, what you're telling me, he said, doesn't exist, did not happen. I'm telling you what you saw. It was the lighthouse light. And I said, no, sir. I said, you're confused. I said, you're confused. I'm telling you. And he said, son, he says, bullets are a dime a dozen. He says, and they're cheap. He says, do you understand me? And I didn't know what to say anymore. And I said, you don't understand. And I felt a presence behind me, like another body. And I knew there was more people in there, like 2 or 3 people, because I was walking by 2 gentlemen. And, you know, he told me again, he says, I'm going to tell you one more time. What you saw was a light, and the light was shining, reflecting off the trees. He says, and that's going to be your story because that's what you saw. And I said, no, I didn't. That wasn't what I saw. And he raised his voice, and the light kind of moved, and it was just, I couldn't see. I put my hand over my eyes, like kind of shading the sun from above, and I was trying to see, and all I could see was like a silhouette. He says, I told you once, I'm going to tell you for the last time. He goes, bullets are cheap. They're a dime a dozen. He says, do you get the picture? And at that point, I just agreed with him because I got the picture. Anybody could get the picture. I listened the first time, but I thought it was just him using a tactic with me. And at that point, I didn't know what to believe anymore as far as who was responsible or who was going to do what. And then my position and what I did as a sergeant, and then being NCOIC every now and then, or running a fire team leader, I said, people ain't going to look at me the same way. People are not going to believe anything I say. I'm going to be looked down at. I'm not going to be respected anymore. And I'm a sergeant in the United States Air Force. I said, and I can't afford that. At the time I was looking for a career in the United States Air Force. That didn't happen, not after what took place. But I recall getting back they drove me back to the barracks. And I believe, I can't remember if it was that night or the next morning, it's when I slipped a note under Larry's door, and I told him that I really needed to talk to him. And at that point, I mean, it was just my mind was so blogged. And I remember calling home again, and my mom wasn't home, but I spoke with my dad, and my dad asked me if I was in trouble, and I said, no, I'm not in trouble. He says, because there's some government vehicles that have been sitting around the house and about. He goes, I'm sure your mother told you. And I said, yes, sir. And he says, I'm a little concerned. He says, what did you get into, or what are you doing? There's something I need to know, or are you doing some kind of covert operations or what? And I said, no, sir. I said, I'm just doing my job every day as a security policeman. I said, I can't explain that. My uncle was at the time in the Air Force as well. He retired from the Air Force with 20 plus years. So I know that he did work, but I couldn't associate any of that. At that time, I was kind of just focused on myself and staying safe and getting back home when the time came. And that, I mean, that's, I get kind of, because there's so many gaps in between on a lot of different things that I want to recall, because there was just so many things going on with so many people involved that it's just difficult. But I understand why people won't come forward, because I was one of those. But here it is 35 years later, and I want some closure on this, and some conversations that I've had in the past with John and some other people that are very close friends of mine here in Texas. And I told them, I said, there's going to come a time where it's going to eventually all come out, or it may not. But, I just don't understand why we were treated the way we were. And then, told one thing, but we were entrusted with multi-million-dollar machinery and guarding bases, protecting people's lives. We signed a blank check to the government, basically, and said, we're here for you. We're going to do what you tell us to do, and then we get pushed down, in my own words, and felt like we weren't doing or living up to our standards. And that was hard to swallow, very hard. That was, I dealt with a lot of issues with that. But then I think what helped me a lot was that, you know, a lot of the guys, they really didn't talk about it. But I got deployed a lot after that. I got deployed to different places in Kenya, Egypt. I got deployed, you know, states. I went to the Plattsburgh Air Force Base. I was, you know, momentarily PDA. I was in Alaska. My last base of assignment was Maelstrom Air Force Base, Montana. You know, way up. I had asked to go back to Texas. They asked me to pick a base, and I picked Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin, which would have put me about 5 hours from home. And they sent me to Maelstrom Air Force Base, Montana. For a while there, I didn't think they wanted me to come home. They were just sending me different places, getting PDA assignments, getting special assignments, you know, putting in charge of this, the honor guard, putting in charge of a bodyguard and a lieutenant colonel for the youth safety department, getting medals for best in youth safety, that kind of stuff, you know. And I guess I engulfed it, that I put all that to the side, and it kept my mind busy and kept me busy and kept me away from the guys where I wasn't able to sit down and try to discuss or question things or ask, what did you see, and so forth.
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, John.
Well, a couple of things that maybe you can expand on before we go to break. When you first got called down to the gate, did you see what the gate guard was seeing? And if you did, what was it?
When I first got called to the gate, the gate guard pointed towards the gate, like outside the gate. And at first I didn't see. I said, "What are you looking at?" And he said, "There's something out there." And I said, "Well, something like what?" And he goes, "There's lights out there." And I said, "Well, what kind of lights?" He goes, "I don't know. There's a lot of lights out there." And I said, "Well, I mean," he says, I don't feel right being here right now." He goes, "I don't know. I don't want to be here by myself." And I was like, I said, "Well, hold up," you know. And at that point, I looked up, and he goes, "You see?" And that's when I had seen a light. And I just saw at that point, that just one light. And then it wasn't until I got in the Jeep to drive back to Bentwater that I saw more light. And then I was like, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, and I was like, what's going on out there? But I never thought in my wildest imagination at that point that we would run into what we did.
Right. And when you saw these lights in your rearview mirror, what did they look like?
In my rearview mirror, at one point they looked like, you know, when a cop car turns its lights on and they're fixing to pull you over. You know, I saw red, blue, green light. And what caught my eye was that then I saw a white light. So I was focusing on the road, because if you recall the back road, the Woodbridge that we take off the East Gate and go to Bentwater, it wasn't it was a country road, and it was a very narrow country road, and it was windy, and you know, it was nothing but woods on either end. And I remember I kind of slowed down and I looked, and it was just, you saw different color lights, but there was nothing. There was no vehicle there. There was nobody there. There were no headlights or nothing. And those are the lights that I saw at that point when I was looking. And then I remember I just sped up and went back to the base.
Okay, and you went over and then you came back. Do you remember what was going on and what was being said over the radio? As far as, was there people describing what they were seeing and what was going on?
Yes, people on the radio. I mean, it was chaos. It was chaotic on the radio. You try to get a word in and you couldn't get one. I don't know if anybody has a recording, but several times you can hear people going back and forth talking, and I'm trying to get. You can hear Alpha One coming over, and then they're calling me, and I'm trying to find out where they want me to report, what they want me to do. And that's when I ended up back at at the guard mount area, or the 81st Security Police Squadron building.
Okay.
But everybody was basically confused on the radio because you had Whiskey Tower talking on the radio, you had Central Control talking on the radio, and then you had the people that were talking on the radio as well, along with myself.
Right.
I remember Lieutenant England talking on the radio, Colonel Hall talking on the radio, and they were giving instructions and asking what to proceed to next.
Okay. All right. So then at that point, when you were going back, Colonel Hall was already out there in the forest. Was already out in the forest with Lieutenant England.
Yes, they were already out there. See, initially, I picked up Lieutenant. In between there, I left out. I had gone. They were at supposedly. I picked up Lieutenant England. I believe was the first one I picked up. Then I picked up Sergeant Ball, and that's when we went out to the East Gate and got to the forest. Then that's when my Jeep got commandeered, and I was given the crew cab and was summoned back to Woodbridge Base to pick up some light all units and get them gassed up and so forth.
One of the other interesting things that you talked about, since you were the one that took the light-alls out there, do you have any idea why they weren't working? Was there anything that, like static, did there seem like there was something out there that might have been affected them? Because from what I understood, they were tested prior to coming out there, and once they got out there, they didn't work. Is that correct?
That is correct. We filled them, and that's what's very ironic about the whole thing, is that we filled them up with gas. I personally filled, along with the staff that they had at the motor pool, filled them up with gas. And, not only did we fill up the light-off, but we fill up the vehicles as well. And I remember at that point, there was more excitement, and the guy says, there was a young lady out there at the fueling points, I remember. And then there was a sergeant. And then they said, they were showing us how to make sure that we knew how to operate the light-on units. And I said, I'm very well aware how to use a light-on unit. And they cranked the first one up that was attached to the truck. And then and it was 3 light-on units, because the other 2 were hooked up behind the other light-on units as well. And I remember flipping the switch, and she told me to prime it, and I primed it, and then I flipped the switch, and, you had that little engine going, and then they lit up. And then she says, and of course, the light switches. And I said, yes, ma'am. We popped the light switches, and the lights came on. At that point, the lights weren't pointing out. They were facing directly down because it would protect them. So, they came on. I remember it got real bright. We turned them off, and she said, she goes, okay, you're good to go. And that's when we left.
Okay.
But we did test them there at the fuel pump.
Okay. Now, one other thing real fast, and we're going to have to take a break. Do you remember, how can you give a general estimate, number one, on how many people you think were out there in the forest, and then also how many people you think were with Colonel Halt's team? Just really quickly, because then we're going to have to go to break, and then we'll come back and talk about this some more after the break.
Roughly that night, and maybe I'm cutting it short, but I say between 30 to 50 people. Easy. Okay. I know we had several of the guys from the flight out there, and I believe some from the ship that had actually gotten off were summoned out there as well.
Okay.
And the whole flight was anywhere from 25 to 30 people, and more sometimes.
Okay. And you guys would have been on midnight shift that night, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Adrian, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back. Sergeant Smith, and go ahead, Sergeant Smith, and when we brought you in, go ahead and start talking towards Adrian about what you told us when you first came in, and we'll go from there. How's that sound?
That's great. Yeah, fine.
Thanks for coming on board.
Last night they all went out there. I remember I pulled my truck up to the East Gate, and Colonel Halt and them said no weapons were to be allowed off base, so he said, you going to stay behind? I said, yeah, I'll stay behind, because I just remembered this. I said, I've already had my encounter with them. I know they're there, so I'm going to stay here. And the whole crowd went quiet and just looked at me. I couldn't figure out. It's kind of funny at first, but they put all their weapons in my vehicle, and I stayed at the East Gate and watched while they all went out.
Okay.
And they took out.
Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, and they took all of the weapons because of what? A legal consideration between the NATO base and civilian land?
Right. Yeah, we weren't supposed to go off base with our weapons unless it was authorized by the British government.
Okay.
And we carried live rounds. We carried, our weapons were loaded. We carried live rounds.
Right. So you were out there. So you stayed back at the gate. So you saw Adrian drive away then after he turned in the weapons, correct?
Yeah, Colonel Halt and Lieutenant Adrian and all them was out there. There was a bunch of people out there.
Okay. And where I want to go next is what do you remember hearing on the radio, and what did you see from the gate, and what do you remember what transpired from that point on?
I remember just chatter everywhere. I mean, they were talking. It was just going crazy. Lights, and we see this over here, over there, and got a red ball of light floating through the woods. I remember hearing that, and when they finally took off, we all backed up and looked, and you could see them leaving. And it was like, if you blinked your eye, they were gone. It was like, to me, it looked like shooting fireworks up in the sky. You know how fireworks goes up? But these didn't explode. They just went out of sight.
And they came out of the forest?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Over Rendlesham Forest.
Okay. And how long was this? Do you remember about what time it was and how many hours it took from that point on?
Oh, gosh. I didn't even look at my watch or anything. It's probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
At least.
Okay. Now, one other thing, when I talked to you about this and you came forward, there's been a lot of talk over the years about different things that happened prior until after, and after the incident on those 3 nights. And you told me a little bit about what happened to you prior to our incident, and I'd like you to go into that for a couple of minutes. And then you've had health issues also. So if you don't mind, go ahead and take us through that.
We were put in alert status. Who knows why? We always, you never know why we went in alert. And that alert, I drew a PP post, a perimeter post, that was behind the east gate, right along the fence line. Mm-hmm. And I was armed with an M60 and a .38 caliber pistol. M60 machine gun. Had 500 rounds of ammo and a 100-round ammo pack attached to it. Mm-hmm. I was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Not to be ugly or anything, but I stood up on the side of the bunker. I had to pee. So I looked down the fence line to my right, and I saw an orange glow in the woods. And I thought, well, is that a fire or something? And I noticed it was moving. Well, it was moving parallel to the fence line coming in my direction. And you could see it in and out of the woods because the woods over there were pretty clean. And my first thought was somebody was carrying a lantern, orange, reddish, glowing lantern. And so I got down inside the bunker and kept looking. And when it got even with me, it stopped. And it was probably 25 to 30 yards in the trees. And I could see there wasn't nobody carrying a lantern. It was an orange, reddish, glowing ball of light. It lit up all the trees around it, and it had like a cat's eye in the middle, a black spot. And I called for an SRT team for backup because I didn't know what it was. I was a 19-year-old kid and it scared the hell out of me. But anyway, a black staff sergeant and a white airman first class came to me. And he was on the left side of the bunker, the staff sergeant was, and the airman was on the right side. And they asked me what it was, and I said, I had no freaking idea what it was. And it was glowing, and it was about 2 to 3 feet off the ground, just levitating by its own power. And the airman, he said, I'm going to jump the fence and flank it and come around on the right side. I said, okay. He said, you got me covered? And I was scared. Before they even got there, I charged my M60 machine gun, and it was ready to rock and roll. All I had to do was throw the safety off, which was considered a no-no. but I was scared and I didn't care at that time. And if it had made any hostile move, I would open fire. I can tell you that. But the airman jumped the fence and went out and flanking it through the woods, and I could hear him going through the woods. And as he was coming up on it, all of a sudden it just vanished. I mean, it was gone. So that scared the hell out of me. So I got out of the bunker with all my equipment, and I went and stayed in the hangar that was right behind me, that night on the baffles that they have in the hangar back there. And the next thing I remember, it was morning time. And what happened between that time and morning time, I do not know.
Wow.
But,
so from there, a few years later, what happened to you?
In 1998, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And my doctors in Savannah told me at the time they'd never seen the type of cancer I had was medullary, but they'd never seen that many tumors in anybody. They said usually somebody that has that many tumors in there has been exposed to a high dose of radiation, and it usually takes 20 years to show up. And I didn't think that about it. All I could think about was the orange ball that I met. That was about 20 years at that time. And I've never been exposed to any radiation, high radiation. And I had 7 tumors in my thyroid glands.
And go into a little bit of detail what you told me about what you found out about how the thyroid affects certain things, which causes certain issues and problems also besides the cancer.
Oh, yeah. It controls your whole body. It controls your thought processes, your memory, your everything from head to toe. Your thyroid controls, which I didn't even know what a thyroid was at that time. Until I started reading up of it. And
right.
It controls your breathing, your heartbeat, your digestion, your skin growth, your hair growth, fingernails growing. Everything that's in your body, it controls that you don't think about.
Right.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What it does is it submits a hormone to go to your pituitary gland in your brain, the middle of your brain.
Right.
And from there, it tells your brain what to do.
Right.
And also got heart condition. That's what I was retired. I got a valve in my heart due to an aneurysm on the main aorta of my heart. I have an aneurysm in the middle of my heart, and the valve doesn't close all the way. Doesn't work properly.
Right. And and one of the things that it stood out to me when you told me this was one of the questions that you were asked was, were you ever exposed to radiation? Which is exactly what almost all of us have. To include, we're going to throw it back to Linda for a minute. She's got a question to Adrian about reaching into it and then what effect it was and what he's had problems with afterwards. Go ahead, Linda.
Thanks. We have talked for the last 4 shows before this one about non-ionizing radiation from unidentified area phenomena that has been reported in a scientific and technical paper at the MOD. And it relates to what happened to John's heart and his eyes. And Sergeant Smith, it may be what is related to your problems. And I'm so curious, Adrian, because I've always remembered you're telling me about feeling like you were pushed to the ground by that light, but you were in some sort of a position that as you went down, your hand went into part of that beam that was coming down over John. And I've always wondered, have you ever noticed anything unusual about the hand that went into the light, and what did it feel like when your hand went into the light?
Well, and it did feel different. It kind of felt warm. Like I had mentioned earlier, when, the light, the spotlight is hitting down and you're close to a spotlight, and it kind of feels warmish. But my hand went in all the way up to about my wrist area, and I remember because that was the hand that I used to brace. I actually used both, but I was pushed with such force that when I went down quick, I stuck my left hand out. And I don't know, I've developed some kind of a fungus on my nails, and it's confusing because I've sought treatment for it. I've had countless different prescriptions given to me, and it doesn't take it away. And I've had blood test after blood test after blood test, and they tell me there's nothing wrong with my blood, but nobody can explain why my nails are deteriorating on my left hand, and it's only my thumb and on my right hand. And I don't understand that because I don't recall my right hand going into the light. There's a possibility. I mean, I wasn't really paying attention like where my hands were, but I recall my hand because it got so warm that when I pulled it up, and as I was getting right back up from my feet, at the same time I felt like somebody was pulling me up. It's just, like I had mentioned, I don't know how long I actually laid there. I say it was just seconds, but I've developed that, and I've sought medication from the doctors. I've gone to different doctors concerning it, and nobody's been able to determine anything other than to tell me that it's a fungus, but they can't cure it. And I don't know if it's from that. I was talking to John one day, and I was telling him I'm getting little bumps, and I actually had a doctor's appointment today, and I spoke to my doctor about these bumps that I've had. They come up in my arm, and I got one on my upper right pectoral area and one in my lower pectoral area. I had one on my leg, one on my left arm, and I actually had one removed back in about 1988, 89. When I first saw one develop, I have one on my left arm, on the crease of my left arm right now. And when I went and gave, now I didn't give blood. They won't take my blood because of the places that I've been to overseas. But I believe, now after all these years that might have had some effect of it because nobody can explain.
Mhm.
Right, and didn't you tell me at one point? And I know we don't have to go into all the details of what you explained to the doctor, but didn't he even address the fact that he thought you may have been exposed to radiation at one point?
Yes, and he asked me. He says there's a possibility you've been exposed to radiation. He says, but he says, I mean, where would you have been? And so I told him, I said, well, I was overseas. I said we had. I said I was stationed in England, and I said, and I was assigned to a weapons storage area, and I said we had nuclear weapons, and I said, and I've worked around nuclear weapons before. I said because I guarded B-52s. He kind of looked at me, chuckled, and he says, "There's no nuclear weapons in England," and I said, "Yes, there is." And I said, "We've actually opened bunkers." I said, "We've had bunkers." And we guarded the bunkers, and it was a very heavily guarded. As Sergeant Smith mentioned, we had a sidearm, we had an M16, we had M60s, we had APCs, and we had fire teams that were running around. I mean, this place was guarded heavily. And then when I was in Mesa Air Force Base, California, I guarded B-52s that were ready to go. They were on alert at 24/7. So.
And Adrian, at Mather, did you see some other unidentified aerial phenomena?
We had a episode at Mesa Air Force Base. Everybody was real hush-hush about it. Nobody ever said anything. It happened over the flight line area where all the B-52s was. Nobody ever spoke about it, but we experienced some kind of object, craft, something that came real close to the flight line, lower, and lights were so bright. It wasn't a vehicle. All the alarms went off. We got raised. We got put. I remember the Air Force back then always was on DEFCON 4, and I remember that they called, and we were put on heightened alert. At one point, I think they said that we would react as if we were on DEFCON 3. And that's serious business there. Anybody who's been in the military, work security, special forces can tell you that's serious business when you get jumped DEFCONs, because that has to come from the White House. It's not a decision that's made locally. That's a decision that's made, way up top.
Adrian, what were you seeing that would have provoked a call for that kind of security?
It was in the evening time, and it was, you have, it was kind of like, it wasn't shooting lights or anything like that. It was like a big object just sitting over us, and with lots of lights. And I'm not going to say it was round and saucery, because we couldn't see, but it was a very large, and it covered at least half to 3/4 of the flight line area where the B-52s were. And if you're familiar with a flight line area that has several B-52s, because of their wingspan, they're pretty large, and we had easy...
Yeah, they call them the Christmas tree.
Yes, exactly. And we had easy 15, 20 birds out there. And, I can't describe the object. I can tell you they had very bright lights. They weren't all white. There were several color lights in there. Amber, red, blue. But the one thing that was different was that it was like you could feel it was a still night, and even though you're close to the Bay Area, or the coast there, it was Sacramento, California, and we're located in the Rancho Cordova suburb area of Sacramento, that's where Mesa State was. It was always kind of quiet, but there was like a breeze of air, and then all of a sudden it was just gone. And when it was gone, it was that quick, snap of the fingers, and we felt like a draft of wind, but it wasn't like, when an aircraft is taking off and you feel all the repercussion and stuff.
A temperature change?
Yes, drastically. The temperature went. It was at night. They were cool nights, and it kind of warmed up when this craft was hovering over us.
And did it leave, pop out? What happened?
It just, it was swooped away, I guess. I guess that would be the word to use. It was just swooped, and I couldn't tell you if it went straight up or at an angle. It was gone that quick.
Did you see something else also similar in Alaska?
No, in Alaska, it was just, the guy said it was a northern light in Alaska, and it was one of the things that the guys would say that they see lights at night, and you had certain areas in Alaska you can see the northern lights, but I was at Wales, Alaska, and at Wales it's basically like a listening post. But if you're familiar with the distance between Russia and the United States in that area where the strait is, it's about 50 miles. And if you get a good set of binoculars, you could actually see the MiGs landing on an airstrip. That's how close you can see. And a lot of those lights that they would see would be the blinking lights from those planes that were landing on the runways and stuff. But I never experienced anything like at Bentwaters or at Mather in Alaska.
And Adrian, I'm just curious, because one of the things that you said was brought up that you'd said at one point was when you saw the stuff going on at Bentwaters or Rendlesham, you said, "Oh no, not again." Besides the fact that it was something strange, was there any similarities between what went on at Mather and what went on at Rendlesham that you can remember?
The similarity that I saw was that, when we were out there, and I'm going to say chasing lights, I'm going to use that loosely. when we were in the forest with the rest of the crew. There was a time, it was like, so the lights, like they were above us, not in the trees, but above us. And like I said, you could feel that warmth. But then I remember when they took off, especially the one that was seemed bigger, like Smitty, Sergeant Smith described. I'm sorry, I used his nickname. We used to call him.
Yeah, they call me Smitty all the time. That's all right.
And
that's what I was known as.
It was a big ball, but it was kind of like amber looking, and then it would change colors into that blue, whitish bluish tint, and it took off so quick because it seemed to have hovered above us, and it took off so quick that we felt like a draft, but it was like a cool draft, and then it burst out into about 5 different pieces.
And what color were they?
They were that blue tint. I mean, they changed from this same ball we had seen that I saw was, and I know several other people saw it too, was it was like an amber looking, but then it would switch colors. It would change colors. It changed blue, and then it changed to a like a bright white, but it had that blue tint on it, like a halo surrounding it.
Adrian, did y'all see the red balls like Colonel Hawk had on his tape? Like the ones I saw?
Yes, and one of the things, Smitty, also, well, you weren't out, you didn't go out there, you said you stayed at the...
No, I stayed back at the East Gate.
But while we were in the forest, at some points we were walking, other points we were running to get from point A to point B. I fell in the forest as well when the animals, because they said the animals were moving and you could hear the animals were very loud and stuff, and then they got real quiet. But I fell. There was a yellow haze, like a yellowish, mustardy-looking haze, about 3 foot off the ground that I noticed. And I noticed it because when I fell, I got up. And I remember somebody had helped me up because they said I fell in a pile of manure. But I was, I remember being helped up, and I looked, and I said, "What's with the mist?" And they said there ain't no fog out here, Busty, because they used to call me Busty back then. And they said there ain't no fog out here, Busty. And I said, "What's that mist? Look at the mist." And it was like a yellow haze that was just, about from waist level down. It was just sitting still.
Adrian?
And we're looking around, and there's lights everywhere, and, you just kind of, it startles you at that point. It startled me, and I was like, well, what is this? And, of course, as, Smitty was saying, we're 18, 19, 20-year-old kids out there, and, I'm sticking my hand down like, what is it? And both hands, I'm trying to look because, we didn't know what it was, but I know it wasn't fog. We know fog can roll in real quick, but this wasn't a fog. It was like a yellow mist, and it was different.
And Adrian, if you put your both hands in that yellow mist, that might explain why both of your hands are affected. And I wondered, could that be what Larry Warren once described as looking like a misty yellow aspirin on the forest floor?
Well, if that's the case, that would explain why because I also have my toenails that I have my toenails that are also fungus also.
Okay, and I don't want to interrupt Adrian, but Adrian, we're coming up on a break. Smitty, I want to thank you very much for coming on. I'll be back in touch shortly. And Race, go ahead and take us to the break.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio, only on kgraradio.com. Here for the final segment of Episode 5 of Phenomenon Radio with our next guest, Larry Warren, joining the show. Adrian Bustinza still on the line, and here is John Burroughs.
Thanks, Race. Larry, I want to welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks, John.
And where I want to go with this last half an hour is, over the years, there's been a lot of talk about different things that went on out there. And I want to set the stage. Adrian had two different encounters with two different things. I want Adrian to start with talking a little bit. He's already talked a little bit about what happened with him and I, but I want him to go a little bit more into detail about what he encountered at first before him and I went forward, and then start having you go back and forth about what you saw and what went on. So go ahead, Adrian.
I'd like that. That'd be great. And it's great to have the opportunity with my old friend. It's been a long time.
So go ahead, Adrian.
You want me to start like when I left the East Gate, or
no? When you were coming up, where you and Larry were together, and what you guys saw together, and what went on, like the mist and the whole thing. And then Linda's got a couple questions on that.
That was in the field, Linda, by the way, before. That wasn't in the trees.
Okay.
Right. And I was going to say, in the field, what I was talking about, and you recall the haze that I was talking about, that yellow haze. And, it was, at night it got cool. The temperature would drop. And that night, we had our field jackets on. It was kind of cool night. It wasn't very cold, but that mist that just hung out. That's one thing that's always baffled me about what it was. Because I know it wasn't no fog. And Larry, do you recall that mist that I'm talking about? And
oh, absolutely. And that red light off in the trees, the amber light you were describing anyway. And again, folks, we have not talked to each other in 35 years at all. And that arced in, and there were a lot of people there. And Colonel Halt was on 500 yards on the other side of the farmhouse. And I think that's where you and John later had the thing when you went into the light and all. Yeah, I won't forget it. But it's very hard to do radio if you've never done it. And I commend you, my friend, because you're John, yourself. The guys that are standing up are heroes. But people got to understand how really fractured and weird this thing was for days and weeks and months, and maybe how different people deal with it or recall. But do you remember in them blue lights that were near the ground? And do you remember something about that, or there was something intelligent about all that with maybe a face? I'm just wondering.
Well, and that's
or is that going too far for you?
No, and that's part of it that you and I experienced. That it's very hard for me, because at one time, it's confusing, and the confusion is that I'm the battle that I'm battling.
I don't want you to have any trauma with this, my brother. You've done me a great service. Unfortunately, you've caused yourself a bit of a problem. You see, now you've joined the ranks of the great saint himself, me, Lord Admiral of the Fleet, Peter Hill Norton, and now your good self, sir, for saying we had nuclear weapons, which thus makes it extreme defense significance. You're getting a medal.
Larry, you are referencing that glowing sphere that you told Ben Jameson and me about in 1986, that you could see what appeared to be 2 or 3 heads or faces with large black eyes and some sort of a spherical glowing something.
I saw something off to the right of that thing that kept changing, like Adrian's, the whitish rainbow thing, and it's hard. Off to the right, and I did indeed, and it broke into 3 parts, like he described. He says 5, but I kind of remember the 3. I remember very clearly. Well, what do I remember clearly? I don't even remember leaving the forest, and that only came up last year when. Hey, Buzz, do you remember leaving the place? Because John and I did a show. You're depicted in it, and your actors look like you guys. Lucky you. when I left, you were there, and other guys, Bobby Ball, all the guys. He sent me back, but I can remember. Oh man. Finally, this thing gets a depiction of how active it was out there that night. It wasn't just Colonel Halt's group. I forget what I was just going to say because I'm a bit overwhelmed that it's so long with all this.
Larry, you have
Yeah.
always described long ago what you said was a yellow, misty.
Yeah, honey, I've been on record for many. I'm the whistleblower for the damn thing, so I know. No.
Okay, and right now, what is so interesting tonight is that we have comparative points between what Adrian has talked about, seeing something that exploded like a fireworks, your long ago description of seeing something split or explode in the air above a yellow, round, misty, something you compared to an aspirin. I wonder if tonight, for the first time in stereo, Adrian has his memory that seems to resonate with what you described in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Adrian, do you remember?
Go ahead.
Adrian, do you remember any of that?
Yes, I do. And, I've never, come out and said this, but that I recall. But there was a point what Larry's talking about where the amber light and the bright, that snowy picture that I'm telling you about. At one point, Larry and myself, if I recall correctly, Larry walked around and I stayed put. And what he's referring to, it was like a snowy picture and you could see a silhouette. Now, the silhouette that I was seeing, it's like, I think I had mentioned this to you once before, John, that I couldn't tell if it was, well, okay, I'll just come out and say it. I couldn't tell if it was a being or if it was Larry. But then I saw the same thing with you when the light hit you. But going back to with Larry, it was, I can't tell you exactly how long, but on that instance, yes, we also, it appeared like Larry was in that, I know he walked like a distance from me, but when it broke, it's when the haze or the fuzzy, snowy picture, it just all congealed together and then just burst into different, into different parts. But, that's what I have difficulty with, is that did I see something, or was it the silhouette from Larry and other people? But then I go back to your part when you got hit with a light, and almost the same thing happened. But I know where you are, but I'm also seeing something else, and I'm not sure if it maybe was a reflection of you, or was it a being?
Adrian,
Right.
could I ask you a question, John? Adrian,
Sure.
do you mean that when John was out there and you were beside him and you went to the ground, that you think that maybe you saw some sort of a silhouette where the red-orange light was coming over John as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And where was that silhouette, possibly a being, in relationship to John's head, torso?
It was like, I don't want to use the word shadow because there's no shadow at night. Not in that instant, but it looked like standing within arm's length, and I thought maybe it was a reflection of him because of how bright the light was. But I couldn't make out, hands or facial parts such as nose or eyes or anything. It was like a snowy, the whole light area was snowy, but then you could actually see, a body, like, a reflection, but not quite a reflection. And that's what, with Larry, I know what I saw exactly.
Can I ask, because I haven't had the chance in so long, do you remember the beginning of guard mount that night? And he was our sarge. I was new on post with a lot of my flight guys. And Adrian, can I just say, because we're in the same game, you were a sarge, I was airman first class like John at that time. Do you remember, brother, that we had the 2 weeks incoming, your clearance comes in, you do the sailing around, riding right shotgun with LE, then you're out on the post. And when you guys got me, I was on perimeter 18, bottom of the flight line on Bentwaters. Right. That's when we went to get the motor pool. And there was a girl named Belinda Green, I think Cookie, was in that.
That's her, John.
She's out there now, Cookie.
Right.
And she, and I want to just real quick, it ain't my show, it's been so long for this, is that, the cameras, when they did that, you can hear, and Adrian, I've been out here screaming for years, right? But when the coppers came, the Suffolk PD, there was only 2 in that area for 50 miles. You can hear them arrive on Holt's tape. But Adrian, I just wanted to ask you, I think Smitty was the guys that when we stopped in the open van, that's when we were in the pickup truck, that's where you were, Bruce, I think, yelled out, "Where the hell do we go?" And they said, "After Eastgate, turn left." And that must have been Smitty if they had him stationed there. So there's another piece for me. But I just want to say, when we actually did meet, I want to say, God bless our mothers, because I remember there's a lot of people that used to say, you came to me and I ran off and spent 35 years being you. As handsome as you are, I did not, as I think some people upsettedly found out tonight. But I want to say, when I did finally sit down with Adrian, it was at a distance we saw each other and a lot of other guys, but he was a really good sarge. He would go partying and drinking all night over the clubs, and John didn't either and all that. But I got a note from, do you remember Cindy Schultz? And I think she might have been a gal pal between both of us. We knew her well. And she sent me a note, and it was in March of 81. And I will never forget that night when you and I sat in your room, not thinking of how are we going to make a big business out of this, totally freaked out and what we're going to do about it. We were young, we were naive, the world was very different. But man, I want to, better for worse, the world owes you a thanks, because you were still in. I felt bad when I left there, breach of contract on their part. I didn't feel safe. I was worried about you. I want to thank you. You inspired me to move on, and I'd do it again. I'm just sorry it ever hurt any of you guys.
Yeah, it's actually, Larry, it needed to come out. What I want to go into something that's been discussed, Adrian, we've discussed it off the air. Larry, I think you've talked about it at one point. But at any time, either when you two were together, and I think you did say something at one point, Larry, if you didn't, correct me. And then I know, Adrian, you talked.
Oops.
Hello.
Hello?
I'm here.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm here.
Is John Burroughs here?
Stand by, Linda. I think John's, he's clicked here. Let me see if he's going to come right back. Seems like we still have him connected.
There's some parties that don't want these conversations to happen. That's all.
Race, I can ask a very important question.
Sure, go right ahead.
I'm here.
There we go. Go ahead, John.
What I was asking guys was simply, it's been brought up that on that night also at some point, I don't know if it was when you saw me go into it, Adrian, or both with you and Larry, and when you saw me go into Adrian, at one point you both thought it looked like at some point like in a triangle or exploded into type of triangle type object. Do either one of you remember that?
Oh yeah, I do, that it was a triangular shaped object but this would have been away from where you guys later on, see folks, had, John, where you went in this thing. I wasn't there. I got sent away and don't remember. I remember turning my weapon in with the sun up. I didn't walk back. Why don't any of us remember going back?
Right. And Adrian, didn't you tell me at one point when I went into it, for a minute it looked like it exploded with some blue lights and triangular object also?
Yes, that is correct.
Do you want to describe that a little bit?
Well, you know, and this is the closest that I can come to say. You know, it can be compared to two things. You know, when you use bubbles and you blow bubbles out and you use the big one and you get one big old bubble and then you poke it and it breaks out. Sometimes it just breaks completely and sometimes it breaks into 3 or 4 different parts.
Right.
That's how it looked like. It just, when it burst, it looked like it just came apart.
Blew off the sides of this thing, didn't it? Like a bubble when you blow a bubble. That works.
Adrian, did you see John rise up into that light?
I can't say that I saw him rise, but, you know, because of the way, I mean, the light was hitting down. I saw John, and he was startled, and I was startled because it seemed like the light was like right at my feet, and then John was right in the middle of it, and then that's when I felt like I got pushed, and that's when I fell towards the light, and, you know, when I felt the push, I tried to restrain myself, and that's when I put my hand down to break my balance and brace myself. But, you know, I couldn't tell you if John was lifted or if John was, you know, levitated or whatever. I mean, I just remember very clearly seeing John, and, you know, it was snowy. I'm looking at him, and then I can't tell you for sure if it was like a silhouette that just, you know, of him or another person, and I'm trying to picture it right now exactly how I saw it, because I saw the same thing with Larry, but with Larry it was different because I know what I saw exactly, and it wasn't just one, it was several. It was, I'd say 2, 3, and with John it was just one.
Was there a difference in the shape between the silhouette and John?
The one from John and Larry were different, yes. The one for John was more, it was not as defined as the one with Larry. And I don't, with Larry, it was, I don't know if it was, you know, when you get a reflection that sometimes they look smaller, sometimes they look a little bit shorter than that person at your neck. But with John, the silhouette was, it wasn't the same size as John. John's a tall person. The silhouette was not that big. The figure that I saw, and I'll be honest, you know, I clamped up. I think with Larry was the only time that I ever spoke with Larry on his part, but I had never mentioned that to John before because that was one. I mean, one too many times for me was more than enough.
Did any thought words come into your mind when you saw the silhouette and John?
Fear. Now, I mean, I can choose better words now to describe it. I mean, back then I was just scared puppy, but now I can tell you it was, I knew something wasn't right. I knew there was something more than just us around. At that point, I just felt a different presence. Today, I still feel a different presence. When I'm out hunting in the dark or whatever, I still feel like I'm not alone. I sleep with my gun.
And Adrian, did you not make the statement, correct me if I'm wrong, that this changed the way you looked at, I believe it was God itself, right? Or did it affect your belief or make you, something happen to you with that? Did you not say that at one point?
Well, I became more, I believe more. I know that, you know, I'm Roman Catholic, and I've always been, but my faith and my hope has tremendously grown, and I believe more, and I know that we're not alone in that aspect, but I also believe that we're not alone in other aspects as well. And even though, I still feel the presence and stuff, I always tell myself, God's walking with me, God's taking care of me, God's protecting me. But, that thought is always in the back of your mind. Those little red flags come up.
But back then, that night, as you saw John, and then you saw the silhouette and the impression of two beings there, did you get actual thought words in your mind, like any telepathy?
I can't say. All I can say is that, at that time, I recall it and very clearly, and I was scared, and I made a pact with myself. I'm not going to say nothing to anybody. I don't want to scare anybody. I don't want people to look at me different or think that I'm crazy. They're going to say I'm seeing things, and they're going to say little red Martians or little green Martians or whatever the case. So, and back in those days, it was different.
Oh, you didn't say that, man.
It was
Did you
very
remember
different
there was
compared
no
to today. Today,
Adrian,
people ask
there was no
questions, they
rumor
want to-
mill?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. Do you remember on the base, they try to make it out all these years that everyone was running around with this? There was no rumor mill at all. In fact, it was anyone that did anything that was involved in it just looked at each other and just went on their way or did the
Exactly.
TV wise. And so that's another myth down the drain, folks.
Right. And
Yeah.
guys, I don't want to cut this off, but we're coming up to the last minute before we go. One thing I want to bring up, I think it's time, and I hope you both agree with me, that the stuff that's been going on over the years ends. As many of us can some point get together. I think tonight was a great first step towards that, where we've learned some things tonight and more people can come forward. Also, anyone that's ever had any kind of encounter over there with this, if they have some health issues, to go ahead, they can reach out to me, and I'll help work them through it. And last but not least, Adrian, possibly sooner than later, we're working on trying to get you over to England. So not only can you talk to the people that live over there about this, but also to go back out in the force and go back through it, not like real time, like it just happened again, but go back through it being over there again. So
It puts a lot together, doesn't it, John? We did it last year. Boy,
right.
You got
Right. And I hope you're looking forward to being able to come back, Adrian.
I am, and actually, I'm a little excited about it. I know I've been cramped all these years, but I just, I told John when I talked to him a few weeks back that, to me, seeing everybody again, I didn't realize so many of you stayed over in England. And you mentioning the names now, Cindy and Cookie, and now my mind is like, okay, now I remember, the names, and I got the pictures in my mind, and Cindy was the redhead, and now everything's coming back.
And that's what we need to do.
Little key words, names are clicking little things in my mind, but I just maybe
it's a healer, brother. It's a healer,
right?
But
and that's what we need to do.
Did I do it to myself, as far as, because I was trying so tight-lipped about everything, with the threats and all. So did I do that to myself, or was there a lack of memory somewhere?
No, and hopefully this is just the beginning. And I'm sorry we're out of time. Race, take us to next week's show.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Next week on the program.